Welcome back. Today we'll talk about compound interest, a hot topic on social media, especially in the finance influencer space. It's often attributed to Albert Einstein, who is said to have called compound interest the most powerful force in the universe, though he probably never actually said that. What else might you be misunderstanding about compound interest? Let's start with a clear explanation of what compound interest is, why it's so popular, and why it's such a big deal, especially why Einstein allegedly thought it was important. The key thing about compound interest is that it grows exponentially, which we'll explain in simple terms. Imagine you have a really great investment with a 10% return per year, a high rate of return. You start with £1,000. After the first year, you get £100 in interest, bringing you to £1,100. In the second year, you don't just get 10% on your original £1,000, but also on the £100 interest. So you end up with £1,210, £110 more than the previous year. And as the years go on, the growth keeps getting bigger because the interest you earn compounds on itself. In other words, your wealth grows faster every year. So if you were to chart this, instead of a straight line, it would curve upwards exponentially, often described as going to the moon. This is why compound interest is so appealing. It gives the sense that if we just save year after year, our wealth will continue to increase and eventually we'll be rich. It's a very attractive idea, and why many financial influencers encourage us to save and let our interest grow. But how does this work in theory within the economy? Economists often use the desert island analogy to explain this. Imagine arriving on a deserted island where you need to set up a food supply. In the first year, you build a basic farm. The next year, you have more food and more time, which allows you to build a better house and better tools. Each year, as your productive capacity increases, you gain more resources, and you can further improve your capacity. This mirrors the way compound interest works for individuals. Every year, with more resources, you can grow faster. That's why this concept of compound interest is often tied to ideas about economic growth. As society grows, there's more to build and create, and thus, growth compounds. This is an appealing idea for those of us who like to think that with hard work and savings, we can grow richer and eventually become wealthy. It's tempting to believe that wealth just builds over time, that if we keep saving, it will lead to prosperity in the long run. However, there's a major issue with this idea. It doesn't really work for individuals or society. Let's start by comparing the ideal scenario of compound interest with the reality of economic life. Let's revisit the chart of compound interest, where wealth just keeps growing exponentially, because it implies that as long as you save, you'll eventually become rich. But if compound interest works so well, why do so few people actually become millionaires? Is it because they're lazy, spend too much, or not saving enough? Or is the truth more complicated? The main problem with compound interest is that it ignores the reality of life cycles and how savings work over time. Most people only work for a limited period of their lives, typically from their early 20s to around 65. But during those periods of time when you're not working, like during student years and retirement, the compound interest doesn't work in your favor. In fact, it can be the opposite. When you're younger, you're not earning much and you're paying for things like tuition. And when you're older, you're not earning income and face high costs for things like healthcare. This means that most people's wealth follows a very different pattern from what we'd expect from compound interest. Let's redraw that wealth graph, keeping in mind that you don't start with zero. You start with debt, paying off a mortgage or student loans. As life progresses, you might have children, which comes with extra costs. Then, in retirement, you need to use savings to survive and possibly deal with medical expenses. By the time you die, many people have exhausted their wealth. For example, my grandparents, who owned property, ended up with nothing by the time they passed away, despite saving for years. This isn't an uncommon story. What might look like compound interest growth is really just people saving enough to get by in retirement. The second reason compound interest doesn't work is because, for many people today, there's simply not enough left over to save. With rising costs for things like housing, food, and energy, and wages not keeping up, many people can't save enough to see real growth through compound interest. This creates another issue. Without savings, people can't build the wealth they need for retirement, which leads to a widespread lack of funds. Now let's consider the broader picture. Why does society seem to grow more over time while individuals struggle? The idea is that economic growth should allow society to continuously grow, just like compound interest. But when we look closely, we see that economic growth is limited. For example, in older economies like the UK, most land and resources are already owned, so there's little room to expand and grow. This leads to stagnation, where the overall economic growth is low, around 1% per year, even as wealthy individuals continue to see returns of 4 to 5%. This difference shows a fundamental issue. As economies become more developed, they face physical limits. So how do the rich continue to grow their wealth in such an environment? The answer is that with limited opportunities to create new wealth, they often buy up existing assets. They might purchase land, stocks, or property, which drives up asset prices. While the rich grow richer, the middle class gets squeezed out. This is happening now. Rich individuals and corporations are growing wealth at a faster pace, while most people struggle to keep up. As resources become scarce, the wealthy simply buy up what's available, pushing the middle class further into poverty. The first sign of this process is rising asset prices. Whether it's housing, land, or even collectibles, the value of existing assets increases, which might seem like good news for asset owners. But in reality, it's just the rich consolidating wealth and pushing regular people further into poverty. This dynamic is often compared to the Bible story of Esau and Jacob. Esau, the older brother, is promised the inheritance but gives it up in exchange for a bowl of food. He values the immediate gratification over his future wealth. This story reflects what's happening today. The middle class is giving up its chance for future wealth by focusing on short-term gains. The growing wealth of the rich is pushing families out of asset ownership, and future generations will likely inherit very little. The reality is that compound interest, while it may seem like a way out of poverty, actually serves to widen the wealth gap. The rich will continue to outbid the middle class for existing resources, leaving future generations with less and less. The solution? We need to change the tax system, tax the wealthy more, and stop overburdening regular people. If we don't, we'll continue to see more poverty and inequality. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you.